The story which follows is without doubt one of the most curious and extraordinary in English history. A true story, so remarkable at the time and which even to this day resonates a narrative you rarely find. A tale of one man and his many adventures, a story filled with plots, twists and turns. He has been called one of the most daring and successful of English rascals, a kernel of conspiracy and a crown stealer. So was he a lovable rogue or a despicable villain? We now look at the fascinating life of Thomas Blood.
Blood was born in County Clare in the Kingdom of Ireland. He was the son of a successful land-owning blacksmith of English descent and was partly raised at Sarney near Dunboyne in County Meath. He was a Presbyterian and his family was fairly respectable and reasonably prosperous. His grandfather was a member of the Irish Parliament and he lived at Kilnaboy Castle. Blood received his education in Lancashire, England, and by the age of 20 he had married Maria Holcroft before returning to Ireland.
At the outbreak of the First English Civil War in 1642, Blood returned to England and initially took up arms with the Royalist forces loyal to Charles I. As the conflict progressed, he switched sides and became a lieutenant in Oliver Cromwell's Roundheads. In 1653, at the cessation of hostilities, Cromwell awarded Blood land grants as payment for his service and appointed him a Justice of the Peace.
Following the restoration of King Charles II to the crowns of the three kingdoms in 1660, Blood fled with his family to Ireland. The Act of Settlement of 1662, which sought to cancel and annul the grants of land by Cromwell, had brought Blood to financial ruin. Blood was outraged and once back in Ireland he attempted to reunite Cromwell forces and cause a rebellion. Although Blood was angered by recent developments, his next plan was to storm Dublin Castle, usurp the government and kidnap James Butler, the first Duke of Ormond, who was the leading commander of the Royalist forces in the fight against the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland. Yet on the eve of the attempt, the plot was foiled and some of his collaborators were captured and executed. It was this moment that Blood vowed revenge against Ormond. He would bide his time though. He escaped Ireland and managed to reach the United Dutch Provinces.
While in the Dutch Republic, Blood gained the favour of Admiral de Ruyter, an opponent of the English forces in the Anglo-Dutch Wars, and was implicated in the Scottish Pentland Rising of 1666 by the Scottish Presbyterian Covenanters. At some point during this period, Blood became associated with the wealthy George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, who 19th century commentators believed used Blood as a means to punish his own political and social adversaries, since his own class ranking did not allow him to meet them in the field.
In 1670, despite his status as a wanted man, Blood returned to England and is believed to have taken the name Ayloffe and practised as a doctor or an apothecary in Romford Market, East London. It was now he would make his attempt on the life of the Duke of Ormond.
Since Ormond's return to England, he had taken up residence at Clarendon House. Blood had followed Ormond's movements and noted that he frequently returned late in the evening, accompanied by a small number of footmen. On the night of December the 6th, 1670, Blood and his accomplices attacked Ormond while the latter travelled along St James's Street. Ormond was dragged from his coach, bound to one of Blood's henchmen and taken on horseback along Piccadilly with the intention of hanging him at Tyburn. The gang pinned a paper to Ormond's chest spelling out their reasons for his capture and murder. With one of his servants who had given chase on horseback, Ormond succeeded in freeing himself and escaped.
The plot's secrecy meant that Blood was not suspected of the crime, despite a reward being offered for the capture of the attempted assassins. In the King's presence, the Dukes of Ormond's son, Thomas Butler, accused the Duke of Buckingham of being behind the crime. It was with this thought that Thomas threatened to shoot Buckingham dead in revenge if his father James was murdered. Although the plot against Ormond failed, Blood did not lie low, and within months he'd made his notorious plans to steal the crown jewels. In April or May of 1671, he visited the Tower of London dressed as a parson and accompanied by a female companion, pretending to be his wife. The crown jewels could be viewed by the payment of a fee to the custodian. Now, while viewing the crown jewels, Blood's wife feigned a stomach complaint and begged the newly appointed master of the jewel house, a 77-year-old Talbot Edwards, to fetch her some spirits.
Given the proximity of the jewel keeper's domestic quarters to the site of the commotion, Edward's wife invited them upstairs to their apartment to recover, after which Blood and his partner thanked the Edwards and left. Over the following days, Blood returned to the tower to visit the Edwards and presented Mrs. Edwards with 4 pairs of white gloves as a gesture of thanks. As Blood became ingratiated with the family, an offer was made for a fictitious nephew of Blood's to marry the Edwards' daughter, who, Blood alleged, would be eligible by virtue of the marriage to an income of several £100s.
On the 9th of May 1671, Blood returned again to the tower and convinced Edwards to show the jewels to him, his supposed nephew, and 2 of his friends while they waited for a dinner that Mrs. Edwards was to put on for Blood and his companions. The jewel keeper's apartment was in Martin Tower, above a basement where the jewels were kept, and behind a metal grille. Reports suggest that Blood's accomplices carried canes that concealed rapier blades, daggers and pocket pistols.
In entering the jewel house, one of the men made a pretence of standing watch outside while the others joined Edwards and Blood. The door was closed and a cloak thrown over Edwards, who was struck with a mallet, knocked to the floor, bound, gagged and stabbed to subdue him. After removing the grille, Blood used the mallet to flatten St. Edward's crown so that he could hide it beneath his clerical coat. Another conspirator, Blood's brother-in-law Hunt, filed the sceptre with the cross in 2 as it did not fit in his bag, while the third man, Perrault, stuffed the sovereign's orb down his trousers. Meanwhile, Edwards refused to stay subdued and fought against his bindings. Accounts vary as to whether Edward's struggle caused sufficient disturbance to raise the alarm, or whether the attempt was foiled in more fortuitous circumstances.
Popular reports describe Edward's son, a man called With, returning from military service in Flanders, and he came across the attempted theft. At the door of the jewel house, With was met by an impromptu guard who challenged him, and before the young Edwards entered and went upstairs, the guard then alerted his fellow gang members. At around the same time, the elder Edwards managed to free his gag and raise the alarm, shouting, "Treason! Murder! The crown is stolen!"
As Blood and his gang fled to their horses waiting at St. Catherine's Gate, they dropped the sceptre and fired on the warders who attempted to stop them, wounding one. One drawbridge guard was struck with fear and failed to discharge his musket. As they ran along the Tower Wharf, it is said they joined the calls for alarm to confuse the guards, until they were chased down by a Captain Beckham, who was brother-in-law of the younger Edwards. Although Blood shot at him, he missed and was captured before reaching the Iron Gate. Having fallen from his cloak, the crown was found while Blood refused to give up, struggling with his captors. Hunt and Perrault were also taken.
Following his capture, Blood refused to answer to anyone but the king and was consequently taken to the palace in chains. There he was questioned by King Charles, Prince Rupert and others. King Charles asked Blood, "What if I should give you your life?" And Blood's epic reply was, "I would endeavour to deserve it, sire."
To the disgust of Ormond, Blood was not only pardoned but also given land in Ireland worth £500 a year. In contrast, Edward's family was awarded less than £300 by the king, a sum which was never paid in full, and he returned to his duties at the Tower, regaling visitors with his tales of the attempted theft. He died in 1674, and his tomb rests in the chapel at the Tower of London.
The reasons for the king's pardon are unknown. Some historians have speculated that the king may have feared an uprising in revenge by followers of Blood, who were thought to have taken an oath to their leader. Others speculate that the king had a fondness for audacious scoundrels such as Blood, and that he was amused by the Irishman's claim that the jewels were worth only £6,000, as opposed to the £100,000 at which the crown had valued them.
There is also a suggestion that the king was flattered and amused by Blood's revelation that he had previously intended to kill him while he was bathing in the Thames, but had been swayed otherwise, having found himself, as he said, in awe of majesty. Following his pardon, Blood became a familiar figure around London and made frequent appearances at court, where he was employed to advocate in the claims of suitors to the crown. In John Wilmot, the 2nd Earl of Rochester's History of Insipids, he wrote of Blood,
"Blood, that wears treason in his face, villain complete in parson's gown, how much he is at court in grace, for stealing Ormond and the crown. Since loyalty does no man good, let's steal the king, and outdo Blood."
In 1679, Blood fell into dispute with the Duke of Buckingham, his former patron, and Buckingham sued Blood for £10,000 for insulting remarks Blood had made about his character. In the proceedings that followed, Blood was convicted by the King's Bench in 1680 and granted bail, although he never paid the damages. Blood fell sick in the summer of 1680 and after 2 weeks of suffering died on August the 24th in his house on the southwest corner of Bowling Alley. He was firm and undaunted to the last and looked death in the face at the end with the same courage he had exhibited many times before. His body was buried in the churchyard of St Margaret's Church, now Christchurch Gardens, near St James's Park. With his unique attempts at crime and the sensation it caused by his extraordinary undertaking, it was said to be naturally unrivalled then, as it has been since. Newsletters and correspondence of the time were all filled with the details of the exploit. It brought a country to a standstill and affairs of state sunk into insignificance. I said at the beginning that this was to be the story of the greatest rascal in English history, but I'm not so sure that it is. After all, it may be only the story of a brave man on the wrong side of politics and society, for his courage and ability placed on the other side of the scale would, without doubt, have given him a far different place in history than the one he now occupies. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. For more amazing stories, join me today and benefit by subscribing, and check out both the videos on the screen right now. And I'll see you next time here on the History Roadshow.